Chapter 2 starts with the story of the Model T Ford and my dad. It's a picture of a patient relationship in a world looking for instant perfection. In the spring of 1988, Holly and I bought a 1917 Model T Ford car. It was a pile of tired blue tin, abandoned to a junk pile since 1953. It was so sad, with a 1950s coat of blue house paint fading away. But still, it was a Model T Ford. It had the engine, transmission, and drivetrain intact. There was no top, no back seat, no rear fenders, no rear doors. It was a cup just a little more than half full. The price? $250. Who gets a one-owner 1917 Model T for $250? We paid, came back with a friend with a truck and a trailer, and hauled it to our garage. But there's more to the story. My dad was born on a Minnesota farm in 1917, like that Model T. Dad was a farmer and a natural-born mechanic. He loved welding and turning wrenches. But the hard physical work of dairy farming was too much anymore. But what would Dad do when he stopped farming? So I thought we should build a Model T together. Dad and I worked on that T for the next 4 years. We went parts hunting together on below-zero days, pulling rusty parts out of snowbanks. We learned how to upholster seats and make wooden wheels. We only spent $2,000 on the whole restoration by doing everything ourselves. The engine works just fine, starting on the second pull every time. The new upholstery is shiny black, and the wooden wheels we built look great. Is it perfect? No, not even close. Thousands of miles of driving with the whole family has taken its toll. The seat springs are a little tired now, and the cover for the folding top has a stitched-up tear on the back side. From 20 feet away, going 20 miles an hour, it looks good. But looking perfect was never the point. Could it look perfect? Sure. Perfection is a phone call and a credit card away. There are Model T parts sellers with huge catalogs of Model T parts. They would be happy to send us a perfect set of fenders to replace the ones that we have. We could have had it perfect in no time at all. When we open the Bible, God's catalog, don't we expect instant perfection? Think of Genesis 1 and 2 as the opening pages of a very thick catalog. The evaluation repeated by God Himself over and over is, "And God saw that it was good," culminating with, "Behold, it was very good." The relatively immediate work of creating through the 6 days gives instant perfection. Given this beginning, what do we expect God to do with the rest of His work? Won't He show His power and perfection, and do it right now? Maybe the Model T is the answer. Perfection is expensive. Floorboards dragged out from a snowbank cost $10. Perfect ones from the catalog, $180. But it's more than money. The day we found our fenders and running boards in a snowbank under an old semi-trailer was 10 below, the dead of winter. The most important thing of that parts hunting day was that Dad wanted to do this with me. It's one thing to have a crazy idea yourself. Let's build a Model T Ford. But it's another thing to have someone share your idea down to 10 below. Instant perfection is a wonderful expectation of God, but patient relationship might be His more common response. We cry out, "Lord, save us now, take this away." He comes with love, puts an arm around our shoulders and says, "Let's take our time." Think of the times God does this biblically and His reasons for saying, "This is going to take time." This chapter explores these 4 reasons why God sets us on the path of patient relationships. The patient relationship involves a wide circle of people who share the same faith. Patient relationships, remember, there is always something for you to do. Patient relationships are patient, even with broken pieces, often fixing instead of just replacing. And patient relationships are even willing to start new projects, not just endure the work that's here today. From the day we bought the Model T to the end of his life 16 years later, Dad and I had the T. We remembered it all. The snowbanks got a little bit deeper every time we told the story. And say, I think it was maybe 15 below that day we found the running boards. We remembered how we got the T running for the first time on Father's Day. The Model T is still in our garage today, and it still starts on the second pull of the crank. It never was perfect, but the memories are. We built a Model T, and that T built a good part of us. Think of all God is building with you. Every day could be a display of instant perfection, and all thanks to Him when that perfection comes. But at the end of many more days, when nothing seems to have gotten done, God puts an arm around our shoulders and says, well, we worked on your patience, didn't we? And it's the we that matters. As He shows repeatedly in the lives of biblical people, our patient relationship is the way He most often works. We build a lifetime of patient trust, and His patience builds us. Now that we have the first theme down, instant perfection, patient relationship, let's look at another one with that balance of one to another. It's not the first, but the second that counts. Our first car was a 1980 Chevy Citation. It was not a good car. We drove it for years, always wondering what would go next. The strangest things broke, like our rearview mirror cracked in half one night for no reason. Did you have that first car too? It was the hand-me-down Buick from your grandmother, or the saddest Civic on the back row of the used car lot. It got you around most days, but you were glad to be done with it. That's our theme. It's not the first, but the second that counts. This theme is largely the mirror opposite of our first theme, instant perfection, patient relationship. There we began with what's perfect and expected that it would continue. Here we start with what we quickly know is not the answer, but we live in patience with the first since we believe a second is coming. The second will not necessarily be perfect, but there's a clear step forward from the first to the second if we have the patience to see it. People can be the easiest to see for this pattern. I suspect you're already thinking of the classic pair, Esau and Jacob. These two twin brothers were already distinguished by God before birth. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. God's choice came before they had done anything to deserve blessing or woe. Another time when 2 sons follow this pattern, but with an interesting twist in birth order, is the parable of the prodigal son, Luke 15. We expect that the younger of the 2 will be the more important character in the parable, and he certainly is the center of the story with his leaving and return to his father. The younger son fills the stage, and the older seems forgotten, but not by the father. The father waited for the younger son to come, but it is not this first lost son that counts only, but the second lost son who must be sought. The father leaves the celebration and searches for his older son. When we would have simply ended the story with the prodigal's return, the seeking of the older son is the final key to the parable. Sons are an excellent example of this theme, but we can expand it to include the larger family. Remember Abigail, the wonderful, courageous woman who saved her household from David's wrath, and then she became David's wife. Wouldn't Abigail have been the perfect match for David? But we hear nothing more of her after the marriage. Instead, we all know the next wife of David, Bathsheba. Who would have thought that Bathsheba would be the mother of the next king? But that again is the remarkable choice of God. Furthermore, it is not the first son of Bathsheba and David that becomes king. No, that first son dies as an infant, and so David and Bathsheba have a second son, Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. In the book, I tell about my motorcycle ride over the Mackinac Bridge, the Mighty Mac. That's the bridge that connects the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan. It is a tremendous bridge, 5 miles long with 2 suspension towers, each 552 feet above the water. The key to riding over the bridge is to count the 2 towers and the curved middle of the bridge between them. In our next first-second pair, we have that sort of relationship. The 2 towers are the 2 temples in Jerusalem. First, the temple built by Solomon, and then the rebuilt temple, the temple in which Jesus taught. The first temple, like the first tower, is, at first, all we can see. But go past it to the high middle span, that somewhat frightening time when there was no temple, and you can see the other tower, which is much more welcome as it leads you home. The second temple is greater than Solomon's, since it is the place Jesus cleanses and where Jesus teaches. But it is also a reminder that these physical temples are but the first, and that a much greater temple has come. Jesus completes this second sequence when he says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Jesus takes us past the towers of physical temples, becomes himself the end of our journey. The first has its time and place, but have faith, a second is coming. That Chevy you first drove has been recycled twice by now. Our first had their day, but thankfully a much better second took their place. So also God has this pattern biblically and in our lives. The second Adam has come, and with him there will be a day when all sad things are made glad. Be patient with the firsts. See the value that they might have, and have faith that the second which follows is the one that counts. we've had two themes with a dual nature, and that continues with the third. But it's a strange pair, uneven balance, as one stands in place of us all. In fourth grade, I was hit in the back of the head with a rock. It really did happen. I think I can still feel it. You know how fourth grade works. Did the teacher see Ross throw the rock? No. So she asked the whole class of 30, who threw the rock? Do fourth grade rock throwers admit their guilt? Never. But something has to happen. You guessed it. We're losing recess, and we now have to do all the math questions, even and odd. How do we feel about Ross right then? Not good. It's not fair. Now, let's imagine we're high school seniors, and Ross is a star at track and field. He's going to state for shot put. At 2:30 p.m., the afternoon before he goes to state, we have a pep rally. And what class do we get out of? Math, of course. How do we feel about Ross now? We love Ross. None of our 7 principles has such a swing of emotion as this one. This contrast fits easily with our balance between patience and perfection. The thought of one in place of us all has an instant perfection to it. The deed is done, and there's nothing left to say or do. But even when we agree with the judgment, there is also a great measure of patience needed. The judgment may be said, but the result is still largely hidden. So it takes patience to trust that this substitution is true. This principle says one stands in place of us and all the future promises that we might make. The foundation of this is Adam. The single sin of Adam and Eve was the one sin which stood for us all in the judgment of God. Romans 5 makes this clear. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. The divine principle is set. One, Adam, stands for us all, and one sin sets the pattern of sin without escape for us all. The missteps of one become the journey for all. We see in the book several other examples of the loss of so much through the one trespass. Moses strikes the rock one time too many and never enters into the promised land. Saul ruins what could have been a successful reign by offering the sacrifice that should have waited. But our theme isn't only bad news. David boldly stands out to fight Goliath, one man in place of us all. But that one in our place often looks like a slender thread, barely holding us together. So Esther steps out of hiding, becoming the single silken thread that held the lives of Israel. We can multiply this theme with the work of prophets, priests, and kings. Throughout these many examples, you have likely been hearing echoes of the greater work done by Jesus as the one in place of all. We can see him serving as prophet, priest, and king, with parallels to many of the others we have noted. Yet, beyond their actions, Jesus uniquely stands in place of us as the new Adam. He is the one by whose wounds we are healed, and the one who is the beloved Son. Being one with the Father, he also stands in our place. His perfection lets him be the silent, suffering Lamb for us. In the dark and silence of Good Friday, he does his work. It was one strong man's work, and done with a quiet that leaves us amazed. When we weren't watching, he did all the work we had left undone and stepped out the journey to the cross. So in the end, I think I can still feel where I got hit in the head by that rock. But this principle is more than a schoolyard injustice. Biblically, we have a wealth of those who stood in place of us all. But thank goodness, this principle is really about him, the new Adam. He alone stands for us in a sinful state we can't bear to watch. He alone rises from the dead with the promise of opening our tombs also. And he is the triumphant one who stands with and for us all. Now, before you close with prayer and take off, pull out your planning guide and look at when you said you would read for Session 3. Next week, you'll be looking at chapters 5, 6, and 7. God bless you as you read and you live out His patience and perfection.